Now, for more on that, we're joined by Matthew Parks, a Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator. Matthew, a very good evening, and thank you so much for joining us.
Good evening. Thank you for having us.
All right. And let's just right there. I guess as Cosatu, you welcome the increase. Just tell us about what it means in the bigger scheme of things, not only for Cosatu, but for workers in general.
Yeah. Well, thank you. So this, for us, is a positive victory. It's going to benefit about 6 million workers who earn within the national minimum wage range. That's a real significant chunk of our economy. It's extra money into workers' pockets. In essence, the increase is inflation plus 3%, so that's about 8.5%. And as you said, it's an additional R2.50 an hour. So the minimum wage increases from 25 Rand 42 cents an hour to 27 Rand, and I think 58 cents roughly. And that's, extra money in workers' pockets. It helps protect the wages from inflation. It helps make sure they're able to take care of their families. It also means extra money into the local economy. And if we look back to when the minimum wage came into effect in 2019 to now, it's increased at a national level from 20 Rand to 27 Rand 58 cents. By next year, should be reaching about 30 Rand an hour. For farm workers, when it started, it was at 18 Rand an hour. And for domestic workers, it was at 15 Rand an hour. So that's a real significant increase for some of the people who earn the least amount of wages. And again, research has shown in South Africa and across the world it's helped to reduce poverty and inequality, and it's also helped to stimulate the local economy, because that means workers will spend money on food, on transport, on clothes, electricity, and so forth. So for us, it's a positive step forward. It's not the end of the road, but it's a good step forward.
Now, as you say, this is a bill that effectively would benefit workers, like you mentioned, farm workers, domestic workers. The biggest issue, again, is the implementation thereof. How do you ensure that it happens, that workers, or rather employers, pay the workers what is due to them?
Yeah. I mean, look, when any law starts, you won't get 100% compliance. That's why you have to put a law in place to nudge employers, to nudge society in the right direction. When it came into effect, many critics said it would lead to significant job losses, and research has shown it hasn't led to job losses. But I think we are quite concerned that whilst most employers are abiding by it, but we're concerned about reports showing about 45% of relevant employers ignoring it, and that's a huge crisis. We don't expect full compliance, but 45% is not acceptable. So it means a couple of things. It means one is that the Department of Labour inspectors need to do much more to cracking down on suspect employers, especially in very vulnerable sectors like on the farms, domestic workers, construction and security, restaurants and hospitality and so forth. It also means that we as Cosatu and our trade unions need to do more work on the ground to make sure workers are aware of the rights, know how to report delinquent employees to the Department of Labour inspectors, or to the bargaining councils, or to Cosatu or the trade unions. And also means that organised business too needs to show some leadership as well to make sure that their constituencies, the restaurants, the hotels, the farms and so on, also abide by the law, make sure they ensure better compliance. The Employment Equity Act was amended last year, which now also helps in a critical way, because any company wanting to do business with the state now has to have a compliance certificate from the Department of Labour showing that they are in compliance not only with the Employment Equity Act, but also the national minimum wage too. And that's going to be a useful carrot and incentive for employers. If you want to do business with the state, which is the larger procurer of services, then yes, you must be in compliance with minimum wage.
You mentioned the trajectory that we've seen since 2019 to where we are as far as the minimum wage is concerned. Would you say that we are on the right path? And looking at the living conditions of workers and just how, everything, as it were, has, is quite expensive.
Yeah. I mean, so it's a mixed bag. Overall, there's good progress. Minimum wage from 28 Rand to 27 Rand 58 cents. By next year, 30 Rand. That's, basically in a matter of, in 6 years, a 50% increase. That's good news. But having said that, when inflation happens, and inflation peaked last year at about 7.6%, it hits workers the hardest because, food inflation, transport inflation, those kind of key items which workers spend most of the money on, have a higher inflation rate. So it means that the wages of workers have been eroded. But having said that, we've always made sure as Cosatu in our submissions to the Minimum Wage Commission, to the Minister of Labour, that it's always been an inflation plus increase. So that's been a positive. But also we're now beginning to move to say, how do we increase the minimum wage? Because we managed to achieve that. How do we begin to push it towards a living wage? And of course, also equally with that, we have to also make sure that how do we grow the economy? How do we reduce unemployment? Because if you can do that, then it gives more space for companies to pay workers better wages. It also means that less people are dependent upon a single worker's wages, because right now the average South African worker supports about 7 relatives. If we can increase employment, or we can reduce the amount of people who are dependent upon one worker's salaries, that eases the burden on them. There's also other factors we need to look at in terms of giving support to workers' wages. So we've got to fix metro rail, because that's a cheaper form of transport for workers in our cities. We've got to also assist Eskom to reduce its dependency upon tariff hikes, which often are double-digit. And we also have to fix Transnet, because that's key to protecting food from inflation and other goods. So the minimum wage is playing its part. We now need to look at additional factors to help complement and supplement it as well.
I know this phrase, political will, is sometimes overused, Matthew, but would you say there is that political will to move, as you say, from a minimum wage to a living wage, and do you feel that it's something that can be achieved?
Yes, it can and it must be achieved. We have to constantly seek to improve the lives of workers, of society, to grow the economy, and all of these are critical to it. If workers get paid more, it means they have the money to buy the goods that our factories, that the economy produces. People who are paid peanuts can't buy much. Political will, the minimum wage is actually politically championed by the president, Cyril Ramaphosa, from when he was deputy president until it's being implemented. So yes, he has shown fantastic leadership in that regard. That's one of the success stories of the ANC-led government. But on other issues, we're not happy. We need to do much faster with regards to rebuilding Transnet. There's been good progress at Eskom, but more needs to be done. We need to do much more on metro rail. So it's a mixed bag. On many issues, there's good progress. In other areas, we're not so happy. And of course, overall, we have to keep pushing, because with an economy with an unemployment rate of 41%, with our levels of inequality and poverty, yeah, that's something we should be celebrating. But also, we don't want to be all doom and gloom, because the minimum wage itself was a decades-long struggle, and it's been achieved despite all sorts of resistance and opposition to it. So it's a mixed bag, but overall, there is good progress. But again, much more work needs to be done by all of us, government, business and labor, and society at large.
And then just finally, Matthew, how have workers, and particularly those that are represented by Cosatu, responded to this positive news?
Look, it's been a very positive response. A decade ago, you had a very almost an uprising into Durrans in the Western Cape, because farm workers are being paid so little. They're getting paid about 6 rand an hour. They couldn't even afford a loaf of bread. They were drowning in debt. The Marikana tragedy was at the heart of it was the issue of workers drowning in debt and so forth. So this has really helped push up the wages of millions of workers, 6 million workers. That's basically half of the private sector workforce. That's benefited many workers in the security, cleaning, transport, fuel, clothing, construction, manufacturing, farm and domestic workers and so on. So that's a major improvement. Many of those workers in those sectors are not well organized. Many of them don't have collective bargaining councils. So this has been a positive injection, and many workers have appreciated it. Of course, not a living wage, but yet nonetheless it's improvement. We've also seen positive responses too by some of the larger companies who've said, well, the minimum wage is here. We want to attract workers by paying them a better wage. So some of the retail companies too have actually said the minimum wage might have been then 25 rand. They are going to push over to use to improve their wages of their store staff to 40 rand an hour. So that's what we also wanted to see, that we're going to inject competition in the economy. We no longer have a race to the bottom of paying workers a slave wage, poverty wages, but let's see how we can get companies to try to improve and compete amongst themselves to attract workers too. So it's a step in the right direction, not the end of the road, but a positive step nonetheless.
Mr. Parks, thank you very much for coming through to speak to us. Appreciate your time. Cosatu Parliamentary Coordinator Matthew Parks.